Welcome to The Essential Element, the Elements of Education podcast, where we believe that the essential element in education is mentorship and relationship. As educators, we know that we're humans before we are teachers, and our students get the same courtesy. My name is Christian Paige, and I want to say thank you for tuning in. You could have chosen to be anywhere else in the world, but you're choosing to spend your time with us, and that lets me know that your mind is where ours is, around the importance of humanity and education. In today's conversation, we got the opportunity to sit down with Dr. John Push Gaines. John is a community advocate, someone who's built his business and his nonprofit on mentorship, who has given back to the community, who was born, raised, and still living in this community, and has three pillars that he talks about in his work. It's people, place, and purpose. John believes in spending the time with people and reaching out to the community, believes that Tacoma is his place, and has invested all of his life work in this area, and believes that purpose is the most important thing that we can teach to young people or to have them discover. John talks about this idea of having people coming to discover their own purpose, of being able to lean into it, and having that be the primary thing of which we educate people through. So without further ado, here's our conversation with Dr. John Push Gaines.
Our school, we really believe in relationships, and that is emphasized through mentor group. And so I wholeheartedly believe in that.
What do they need? I have to be able to answer that question. And that takes a little bit of time. The biggest teacher, I think, is failure. The brain works in failure. And those failures are actually synapses rewiring themselves in your brain.
And think about where you want to be. Because when you find your place, you find your people. And our purpose is attached to people.
You know, when there's a phenomenal teacher, when there's a phenomenal educator, when there's a phenomenal mentor, one of the mistakes that we make is we make it look too easy. Like, everyone sees the shining moment on stage. No one sees, right, like the hard time spent. All right. So John Push Gaines, my guy, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Thank you for joining us on The Essential Elements. And really what we want to talk about today, right, is this idea of mentorship.
Yeah.
In the element schools, we realize that some of the things that we're doing are not normal, right? And that's the fun part of being in education. Our values would say, our structure would say, the way that time is spent would say that relationships is the most important thing when we talk about education.
Absolutely.
And so I want you to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. I think you're a man who doesn't really need much introduction. We get to spend a lot of time together, but for folks who may not know who you are, right, who is John Push Gaines?
Man, first, I'm a husband. I'm a father. I like to lead with that. I'm a person of faith. And then everything else falls in the middle of that, right? Or I guess after that. I was talking to my daughter this morning, she's 4, and I said, close your eyes. And I said, I want you to imagine where you're going to be in 5 years, where you're going to be in 20 years. And she's kind of opening her eyes. She's 4. And she's like, I'm going to be a dancer. I'm going to be a basketball player. I said, you can do it all, baby girl. I said, but you have to see it. I share that to say because I like to believe I'm an idea generator, but I first like to generate ideas with my own family, and then I just take those same concepts, the things that we do in my own home, to the external world and provide through my LLC, through my nonprofit, mostly working with educators and students and everyone in between.
Yeah. So what's that work look like, right? I hear you talking about that with your baby girl. You're talking about visioning and integrity of right, this happens in your house before it happens elsewhere. But what does that work look like with educators, with schools, with the nonprofit?
Yeah, so at the local level, it's, for example, we were at a school yesterday working with some students that are experiencing racism in their school, hate speech. So sometimes it looks like that. Sometimes it looks like us showing up and mentoring young people with a curriculum that helps guide the mentorship, right? And so it's not just us showing up and being a fly on the wall, it's being intentional and teaching young people, right, how to generate ideas, how to, I remember I had a mentor tell me, he said, poor people talk about material things, rich people talk about money, and wealthy people talk about ideas. And I believe we all have wealth. Wealth isn't necessarily money or material things. I believe wealth is the hidden gems and the diamonds and the values that we all have inside of us. And I'm trying to extract those diamonds, extract that gold from young people to get them talking about ideas.
So what's the value for young people in talking about ideas, right? Because like I'm sitting in classrooms, right?
Yeah.
And you know, we got to solve math equations, and we got to write expository essays, and we have to, like, what's the value of really like that ideation over like compliance? I think of what shows up a lot in education.
Yeah, I think outside of one understanding a person's worth and their purpose, it starts with a vision and an idea. So I think the value in it is, right, you're attaching that idea to a young person's purpose. And Angela Duckworth, a great educational researcher, she said, it's not our jobs to give people or young people their purpose. It's really to get them grappling with their purpose. And I believe by generating ideas, like my baby girl, for example, right? I want to be a dancer. I want to be a basketball player. I like the idea, but more so, she's starting to identify her purpose in this world. And I think that's where the real value is. Yeah.
So you mentioned this word a lot, right? And I'm interested in your definition for, or how it applies to you, right? Like, what is purpose? What's your purpose? And how does that play out? Like, how does that inform the work that you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I think sometimes folks I believe purpose starts with the place, right? So for me, I remember I had a mentor tell me when I was young, it's the same conversation that I have with my daughter, the same conversation that I have with students. I had a mentor tell me, he said, once you find your place, you'll find your purpose. I'm like, what does that mean? And he's a storyteller. He's like, every great person, they first found their place. For example, I was struggling with this idea of moving away. I was wanting to run away from some of the trauma and the adversities that I experienced in Tacoma. So I'm like, I want to live in California. I want to live in DC. And he said, man, once you find your place, like, stop bouncing around, really meditate, sit, and think about where you want to be. Because when you find your place, you find your people. And our purpose is attached to people. That's what I believe, right? And so for me, after sitting in DC, right, I was there for a week, and I thought my purpose was to be an attorney. I was preparing for an internship. They're going to pay me extremely well, living on Capitol Hill. And the day they offered me this internship, we want to pay you this amount of money. We want to get you an apartment on Capitol Hill. I had a dream that night, and I just felt like my place was Tacoma. And I came back home with no plan. Like, this guy that, and this is important, right? Because I think a lot of times people think I need to have a plan first before I find the purpose. I didn't have a plan. I came back home from this, young guy that had recently graduated college, top of the School of Business, pursuing law degree. And then I came back home, everyone had big hopes for me. Like, man, what are you doing home? I worked at the Boys and Girls Club. Place attached to people, those young babies in the same neighborhood that I grew up in, helped me find my purpose in that season, man. And so for me, my purpose in this season is really, at the core, is inspiring the next generation to vision and dream beyond their circumstances, to see something outside of what they see on a day-to-day basis, and know that if I could see it, I can become it. Because that's what happened for me as a kid, and I couldn't articulate what was happening in the moment. And it took for me to run away from that and use this gift of creating vision and dreaming for self-gain. I'm gonna be an attorney, I'm gonna make a lot of money. I'm like, oh, it's not for me, right? And I get emotional talking about it, because it's for the people. And it wasn't until I had that opportunity to work at the Boys and Girls Club and countless times see these young black and brown babies, similar stories to me, and thinking that this was it. Like, mom's not here, dad's on drugs, this is it. And I knew at that point, like, I could be a light to inspire these young babies. And so, for example, it comes full cycle. So as we're talking about purpose, I was with a young man on Tuesday. He's 22 years old now. I met him when he was 10 years old at the Boys and Girls Club. He's graduating next year from college, was an All-American football player. And he said, it's funny that you're a motivational speaker now. He said, because you were so quiet. He said, but I appreciate that you were a great example for us. So I wasn't going in there telling them something. I wanted to more so show them, hey, I came from this community, I'm back in this community, but I didn't let the community or my circumstances define who I am today. I helped, because I was helped create vision, for myself, that's helped shape who I am today. And I just want to, it's still the same. It might look different arenas, but at the core, that's what I want to do for young people.
Yeah. And that's a good word. I'm like reminded of the Baldwin quote when he talked about, being quiet and being able to show. Baldwin says, sometimes, and I'm paraphrasing, right? Sometimes we get upset about like young people's inability to listen, but we're never surprised at their ability to mimic. You know what I mean? So like even when they look like they may not be listening or they're scrolling on this or that, right? Like they're still seeing the actions of the person who would be considered role model in the space. Yeah. So I appreciate you naming that. I'm like, I'm curious about this, right? Because you're talking about purpose, you're talking about place, you're talking about mentorship, you're talking about helping young people build their strengths. And I'm curious of like, your experience in education, right? I should have put some respect on your name at the beginning of this, right? Because it's Dr. Push Gaines. Right? Like you've gone through K-12 system, right? Bachelor's degree, master's degree, terminal degree, like all of these things. You've experienced education at every level. And in, juxtaposing this or the Venn diagram of this idea of purpose, right? Like what has been the purpose of education in your life? And what do you think the purpose of like education should be in general for the young people, who you're in community with?
I believe education should be at the core. I think it should be one to inspire students, but also to help them build confidence, right? And like I mentioned, to get them grappling with their purpose. And so yesterday, the president of my university texted me. Now, he checked in on me and then followed up with asking for some donation, right? But it's great to have a relationship, with him. And it's an impactful relationship, but that wasn't the most impactful person. He was the dean of the School of Business when I was there. It wasn't the most impactful relationship that I had in education. The most impactful relationship was with my first grade teacher. And this was a powerful relationship for many different reasons. But the most important was she helped me build confidence in myself, and not just me, all the students in the classroom. She didn't look like us, came from a different socioeconomic background, grew up completely different than the students that she was teaching, but at a young age, she knew that if she could instill hope, right, and belief and confidence in young people, she could change the trajectory of their life. And so for me, my mother passed away when I was young, and literally a week after my mother passed, I was in this classroom, and this teacher, she was at my mother's funeral a week prior, right? And she says, today we're doing the I Have a Dream assignment. And I don't want to move past the I Have a Dream assignment, because I think we water down, I think as a society, folks water down the legacy of Dr. King, where it's a day and it's sometimes it's a month, it's an event. But really, like what I talked about in the beginning, what Dr. King was doing, he was teaching people how to generate like creative vision and ideas, right? Seeing, like, how could you see what you saw in the environment as we talk about racism and hate speech, and we're doing the equity work, right? Imagine Dr. King doing that work, but then being in charge and responsible for casting vision, not just for the people, but also for himself, right? So anyway, it was I Have a Dream assignment. And it was the first time that I remember sharing like the vision that I have for my life. And she pulled me to the side and she says, John, basically, I'm paraphrasing, she knew what I had been through, right? She knew that I had learning disabilities. You know, like I mentioned, she was at my mother's funeral a week prior. She understood the adversities, like ACEs, as we talked about ACEs, right? 10 out of 10 on ACEs. So if you experience these certain things all before the age of 18, I was probably a 10 out of 10 by the age of 11. Yeah. So she understood, right, her assignment in that moment. And she says, John, what is your dream? What do you want to do? What do you want to become? And you snatch hope away from a young person, right? My father wasn't in my life. Like the environment snatched any hope or confidence that I had. So to ask me that question in that moment was disturbing. It re-traumatized me because I thought that I was going to be what I could see. And everything I saw around me was negativity, right? Chaos. And I'm like, this is going to be me. This is going to be my life. And when she said that to me, man, I sat there and I said, I don't have a dream for myself. And then she said something that changed the rest of my life. She says, John, I believe in you. It's the first time I heard that from an educator. I no longer felt like just someone trying to fit in. I felt like she actually saw me, right? She says, I believe in you. And I said, you know, I want to play shallow for me. I said, I want to play football in college. I loved playing football at recess. But she knew that I was something more than an athlete, right? And so she said, what else is it you want to do? What else is it you want to become? And there's an image of Dr. King. That's why representation matters, right? Because in my community, for the most part, the black males that I saw were gang members. My father, who was absent, my father literally used to rob banks, right? So my image of like what a successful black male, I didn't see it. And I looked up at this image of Dr. King and I said, I want to be a doctor like Dr. King and change and inspire the world. I had no idea what I was saying, but a seed, right? Yeah. A seed was planted in that moment. And she says, John, I believe in you. And I remember crying, man, because her belief in me was significant. But in that moment, I could remember beginning to believe in myself. Did life get easier? No, but as we talk about education, my educational journey, like I didn't quit when I felt like quitting. When I was in environments or classrooms where I felt like I didn't connect with teachers, it was that one moment, right, with that teacher that instilled hope in me, that instilled confidence in me, that gave me a foundation to fall back on. And I knew if I could fall back and if I could look up, I could always get up, right? Yeah. And that moment happens for students. I hope it can happen for students, I believe, at any age, K through 12. It happened to happen for me in first grade. I needed it. I think if it would have been a year later, and that's why when I share with educators, like education and math and English, it's all important, but make sure you understand that like helping young people grapple with their purpose, building confidence, because our world is changed by how we conduct ourselves in the classroom, by how we conduct ourselves in the hallways, right? Because that only translates to the community. And so for me, if that wouldn't have happened at that point in my life, maybe it would have happened, but I know for me, I needed it at age 7. Yeah. A young, hopeless little boy. I needed someone to tell me that they believed in me, and it rebirthed something in me I didn't know needed to be rebirthed. So,
man, there's so much good in there.
Yeah.
I'm like, I got like 1,000 questions, directions that we can go, and I'm just so curious about, right? Like, because I hear you mention it, urgency. Like you left us on ellipsis. Like had I not ran into her at this age, and I don't know what ends up next in the story, right? And we'll never find out. It's never necessary. But like the thing that I'm taking away is like, like that urgency. Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
who we have to be. This is necessary. The relationships are necessary. The mentorship is necessary. And the other thing that I love that you said, right, is like the imagination for folks
Yeah.
is necessary.
Yeah.
The vision is necessary. And I'm reminded of my sister Brooke Brown, right?
Yep,
She was Teacher
yep.
of the Year 2020, really solid. But she says, right, essentially that our liberation is found in our imagination. She says the work that we're trying to do as educators, particularly equity-based or anti-racist educators, is actually science fiction.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Like it's
yeah.
based on all the cool stuff and
Yeah.
the statistics and the data
Yeah.
and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But the thing that floors me, she says, and we've never seen the world that we've wanted to see before. Right? So like the game of education has to be innovative, but it also has to be done with urgency.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing you on that. And I'm wondering, like, for, we're thinking about people who stand in front of young people, classrooms, educators, teachers, whatever that may be,
Yeah.
right? But folks who are in front of, like, who do we need to be in order to not miss that moment, right? I'm always, I'm convinced, one of my sisters' name is Karina Hooks, and she says, we're not human doings, right? We're human beings.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's
Yeah.
a lot of the strategies that exist
Yep,
everywhere.
yep,
There's
yep.
a book who would tell you to do this and that and whatever. But like, who was the teacher? Who do we need to be? You know what I mean? Not what do we need to do, not what is the
Yeah.
what is
yeah.
the best practice? Like, what do we need to do to be best people? Who do we need to be in those
Yeah.
moments for young people to make this work?
Man, the call is real, right? So I think there needs to be an understanding of the call. I believe teachers are called. I was talking to an educator yesterday, and I don't want to mess up everything she was saying, but she said, it's all, I used to hear from my grandfather as well. There's only a lot are called, but few are chosen, right? And I believe educators are those chosen few that are called to do the work, chosen to do the work. And I think the more understanding, like Miss Crowley at the time, who understood the magnitude of the call, she knew that she was chosen for that moment.
Yeah.
And honestly, the reason why I say there's urgency, because I know it didn't happen for some of my friends, like some of my guys, right? And so by the age of 11, 12, some of these guys, and we could read about these stories still, look them up. Some of these guys that I used to rock with ended up going to jail for murder, right? And that's why the call is urgent. And we see some of the same things happening today, unfortunately, with some of our young babies. And I'm just talking about like Pierce County, right, Tacoma. We see some of the same things happening today. And that's why I feel like, me having a voice, I want to be the one to encourage the leaders and inspire the leaders to not miss moments, right? My baby girl talks to me and teaches me about moments all the time, to pause and understand the magnitude of this moment, to help create leaders, right, that can see beyond. And what you said was so incredible, because that's what Dr. King was doing. He saw a world that did not exist, and we have to keep building leaders that see a world that does not exist, and that's the only way we continue to grow. You can't do that without confidence. You can't do that without hope. And Dr. King, my dissertation was on mentorship. Dr. King gives his credit to mentors. I think that's why he dedicated his life to at the core was mentorship. Some might call it discipleship, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's what great leaders, the one common trait with all great leaders, great educators, they have a mentor and they're mentoring some folks, and they're intentional. It doesn't just happen, right? They're intentional. So even in my life, I'm always meeting with, you want to call it coaches or folks that could help me become a better me, so that as I go out and mentor that next generation, I want to do the same. And I think that's what the educators that I meet, and when they understand that, those are the ones that are doing the work that transforms communities and builds leaders.
Man. Bro, there's so much gold in what
Yeah,
you're saying.
yeah.
So like, the ideas just keep bouncing around, and I'm like, I'm reminded of like the indigenous principle of like the 7th generation. You familiar?
I'm not.
Right? Oh, shout out to the pen, right?
I learned something new when I talk to you, so go
That was
deep.
good stuff,
Yeah,
right? And I'm
yeah.
sure you heard it in some iteration before, because I think any culture that passes down their knowledge via oral tradition like has some semblance of this story.
Yeah.
Right? But, you know, thinking about who is indigenous to this land, right, I believe like this is the original story here.
Yeah.
But the principle, right, is like when I make decisions in the world, when I do things in the world, that it's to honor the 7 generations of people who have come before me and make way for the 7 generations of people who will come after me.
Wow.
Right? And so
Yeah.
like the magnitude of my decisions becomes bigger, right?
Yeah.
Because if
Yeah.
like, you know, the work that I'm trying to do is to honor Dr. Martin Luther King and whomever else was involved in the civil rights movement,
Yeah.
right? Like to make sure that their work was not in vain.
Yeah.
Like there's more weight on my shoulders in that decision.
Yeah.
And also to think about like, you know, you got children, I have children.
Yep.
And our children's children, like,
Yeah.
if this
yeah.
is our place, right, will also occupy, so the decisions have bigger magnitude.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm also aware of is like wisdom doesn't belong to any singular person. And so I'm curious, right? Like sometimes we play conduit in the middle. You're talking
Yeah.
about being mentored
Yep,
and having
yep,
a mentor,
yep.
right? Like what's a valuable lesson or series of valuable lessons that you've gotten from your mentors that you ensure your mentees get to be strong in the world?
Yeah, I would say my grandfather, who grew up in the South. I think about my grandmother. I think about the Little Rock Nine in 1957. My grandmother was born in Little Rock. I'm talking about my grandfather as well, but my grandmother was born in Little Rock in 1921. And Arkansas is still considered extremely just racist place that thinks they're like, you know, 40 years behind, right? I visited there recently just to try to find some of my story, right? But I think about my grandmother who instilled in me the principle of like, if you have something in your heart that you want to do, go do that thing. And for my grandmother, that looked like purchasing real estate on the hilltop, owning a produce store, collard greens, in the, you know, in the 50s on the hilltop.
Come on, Grandma.
Right? And so she taught me so many important lessons. Like, don't let anyone stop who you want to become, right? There's going to be barriers, but barriers are meant to be pushed down. I think about my grandfather who talked about love, and that's if you ever heard me at an assembly, that's the core of my message. My grandfather used to say it like this, just, John, I always want you to love people as you love yourself, but don't forget about yourself, right? And that's a message of some of the great civil rights icons. Love others, love people, love yourself. But I think oftentimes as society, we neglect and forget about ourselves. And I can talk about mental health and young people, but I really try to instill in young people, one, go for what's in your heart, right? Because most likely that's the thing that you were created to do. And two, don't forget about you. Don't forget to fill your cup, right? Have a system in place where you're building yourself on a daily basis, because as you fill your cup, you go out into community, it's going to be that much easier to pour that cup and to love others. And so those are the two main messages from my first two mentors. And typically, you know, your first mentors are hopefully, right, folks that are close proximity in your family. So is my grandfather and grandmother.
Yeah. Man, that's good stuff.
Yeah.
Here's one of the things that I love about what you've shared so far, right? Is like your grandmother and grandfather are in this conversation.
Yep.
Miss Crawley, I think you said her name
Yep.
was, or is in the conversation, right? And not all of the parts of the story match.
Yeah.
Right? I think like, you know, agreeing with you that representation is important.
Yeah.
But my grandmother would say it like this, right? Like even a broken clock is right 2 times a day.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get good information from unlikely sources.
Yeah.
Or sometimes, right, like things that we think are supposed to match, like
Yeah.
we get something out of left field. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I know about your work and one of the things I appreciate about it, it's like even talking about Miss Crawley, you all were not from the same place.
Yep.
Not from
Yep.
the same
Yep.
socioeconomics, any of those things, and were able to form and build a relationship.
Yeah.
And with the students who I see you in relationship with and mentoring, they don't always, fit in the same category that you would, right? Whether that be diversity characteristic or whatever else. Interest really is the thing that I'm really interested. So when you have these things and, the students don't necessarily come from the same space as you, I think this is the question I'm trying to get at. And the pinnacle is, right, like, how do you encourage someone to go on their path and not your path? Right, like I think it's easy to find somebody like, yo, I want to go get, the same degree that you have. I want to run the same kind of business that you do. But what I'm hearing you say, right, is like you also run into folks who got dreams elsewhere. Right, how do you help them go on theirs and not yours?
Yeah, man, I learned a long time ago that this idea of a seed, right? Seeds are meant to be planted. But if I were to take that same seed and place it on a windowsill in this coffee shop, right? I can come back in 10 years and that seed is still going to be a seed on that windowsill, right? So my goal, I guess, with young people, and I feel like what I like the most about the best mentors that I've had, it's like a common language. The ones that knew the common language, right? Hope, faith, love, right? The things that they could instill in me that would water those seeds, and then would help me like create systems in my own life and find other ways to continue to water that seed so that seed didn't stay on that windowsill. And so for me, what I try to share with educators, the hardest thing for me is when I talk to students and they say, something happened in class, or, this is what happened, or this is what I'm dreaming. I'm like, hey, what did your teacher say? Nothing. And then when I talk to teachers or educators, they say, well, I don't know what to say. I'm like, well, learn the common language. You don't have to know their story or try to relate or try to share. And it's the worst, I believe it's one of the worst things you can do. Someone, they share something that has happened to them or share a piece of their story. You try to connect and say, oh, well, when I was young, I think the best thing to do, or what I try to do, because I know there's going to be people that have far worse stories than I have, right? And there's going to be people that can't really relate to my story. Right, adversity, right, we carry our burdens differently, right? Adversity hits us all a little different. And so for me, it's like, find out what's the common language. What are some things that you think are, that won't connect? I guarantee you they most likely will connect. And for me, that was, teaching young people, like, it's okay to, and for me, love, it's almost becoming taboo. Like, you can't talk about love in classrooms or in hallways. This morning, my daughter had a doctor's appointment early this morning. I'm like, let me cook, I want to cook my family breakfast. I cooked them breakfast, and she came home and gave me a hug. She said, Dad, I love you so much, right? I can go on a walk with my family, and my wife will say, I love you, thank you for going on a walk with us. And what I'm trying to say is, love is sometimes spelled T-I-M-E. Love is sometimes, you know what I mean? You can say I love you without saying I love you. So I think teachers like, well, we can't say that. You can say I love you by not being silent. You can say I love you by doing the extra work outside. The trainings we had really didn't, that's okay. There's YouTube, there's books, there's research. You can say I love you, so I'm going to put in the extra work so that I can better understand, your background, with the hope that I can share and instill a belief, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
Man. Yo, send everybody home. That's T-I-M-E.
Yeah.
Man, that's so important. Oh, man. So one of the things that I've gotten in the practice of, and this relates to the thing that you're saying, is I think that's one of the biggest things in education that, time is the most valuable resource, right?
Yeah.
We're on this period structure and this schedule and this bell, and you got to work bell to bell and don't lose any instruction time, and right, like all of those different kind of dances. And one of the things I've been confronted with lately is if I say that I don't have time for something, right, what I'm ultimately saying is that that's just not a priority for me right now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right, because everybody has the same 24 hours in a day. Like, that's just how it operates.
Yeah.
And I think I've been trying to get in the habit of being able to say, but to put it in the context of no, that's how you spell love.
Absolutely.
right?
Real talk.
That's how you spell love. That's wild to me.
Yeah. Like, you know, you're my brother, right? We both have families. We both have crazy schedules, local, nationally. But it's like, hey, let's get together, let's walk. We both make time for that.
Yeah.
Right? And one guy be like, bro, I love you. It's like, no, like, we're gonna wake up at 6:30 and go on a walk.
Yeah.
Nothing else needs to be said.
No, facts.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with, I think, with educators, like putting a priority on that, spending the extra time, and not even extra time, just prioritizing the time, you know? So.
Yeah. Oh, facts. And you said it doesn't need to be said, but I love you though.
Yeah, love you, bro. Yeah.
As we're coming to this, man, you've given us a lot of gems today. And I'm curious about one last question, right? Because I think this is important for people to see. I think, you know, when there's a phenomenal teacher, when there's a phenomenal educator, when there's a phenomenal mentor, one of the mistakes that we make is we make it look too easy. Right?
Yeah, straight
and
up.
I think for young people, right, like a lot of the times we miss out on both the external work and the internal work that had to take place. Like everyone sees the shining moment on stage. No one sees, right, like the hard time spent in that isolation or the research that it took to get to or the, and I'm curious in your practice, right, like what's the hardest lesson that you've had to learn as you've been on your way to improvement?
Man, and I love how you phrase that, because I think some might call those failures, right?
Yeah.
I believe in lessons, and some people will say, well, I failed. Well, it's just a lesson. What if you learn from it, it's not a failure, it's a lesson, man. So I've had countless lessons. I guess I would say the hardest thing I had to learn in this work, I guess really like overcome, was just finding my voice. Right? And just being confident in that and understanding like the magnitude of moments. And I'll close with a story. I recently, this was last school year, I visited her name now, Miss Coker. She's still an educator in Tacoma School District.
This is the first grade teacher?
My first grade teacher.
Come on.
So I went to her school and she had exposed several of the students to like my children's book, and they had been watching some of my YouTube videos. And so when I get to the school, I walk into the cafeteria and the kids immediately, like a majority of the kids, begin to cry. And I'm thrown back. I look at Miss Coker like, yo, like, did you set me up? Like, what's going on? She says, no, they're just happy to see you. And then this young man, as I walk around to each students, right, at this point in my life, I found the confidence I have overcome to speak and not miss moments. So I walk around to every student, hey, I believe in you, I see you, you matter. Then this young man, he came up to me, and I knew a little bit of his story just from getting a backstory from Miss Coker. And I knew that he had been abandoned by his father, was being raised by like an auntie and uncle. He comes up to me with a glare on his face, and he says, I'm happy to see you, man, but I'm not about to cry. I said, okay, that's cool, bro. And I said, tell me more about that. He said, well, real men don't cry. My dad said, real men don't cry, knowing his father is in prison, right? Thinking about his father's actions, who told him that? That forced him to bottle up I don't even know why he's in prison, but he bottled up everything, and his road has led to him being in prison. So I looked at the young man, he's 10 years old, 4th grade. I said, I believe in you, I see you. Immediately his eyes welled up. It was like the first time he had heard that from, and it was almost like the cycle had repeated itself. And I think about my story in my life, and just where I'm at today, like the young boy that had the speech impediment, the young boy, introvert, young boy that knew that I wasn't called, that I was chosen to a people, and that has helped find my purpose. I can't think about the failures, only the lessons from the failures, and help those failures become lessons. And really, I guess the biggest thing for me was the same thing I'm trying to do with educators. Prioritize it because it matters, right? Make time for it because it matters. Don't miss moments. And so I've had to overcome my fears because I never want to miss a moment, because I understand the magnitude and the significance of just what 30 seconds can do. right? That seed, when it's not planted on a windowsill but planted inside of a person, becomes limitless.
Yeah.
So,
Man, that's gold. That's gold. Oh, man, thank you for everything that you shared with us. Thank you for what you're doing in the world, man.
Yeah.
Like, I think that that's important to acknowledge and to say, right? I'm sure that there's a lot of people, who are grateful for you, but I just want to be one to say, like, thank you.
thank you, brother.
Thank you, man. I know the canvas, the landscape. I appreciate you talking about place, and I have a commitment to Tacoma, and to know that you're here shaping the canvas of what my 7th generation who will follow, will experience is important to me, man. So I appreciate you for being with us. Thank you for the gems that you shared with us. And thank you for continuing to remind us, right? As we talk about the essential element, the relationship is everything.
Yeah.
And mentorship is everything, right? I'm hearing you say we can't afford to miss moments.
We can't.
Right? Because sometimes those moments are monumental to the movement that somebody has in their life in the future.
Absolutely.
So thank you, man. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. I know it's supposed to go without saying, but I love you, man.
I love you, brother. Appreciate you.
Ooh.
Dope.
Elements of Education is a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Tacoma, Washington. We're dedicated to changing public education to better serve the diverse needs of students by focusing on our core values of empathy, community, balance, and thinking. For more information about the work that we do, please visit elementsofed.org, or you can follow us on Instagram at Elements of Education.